We don't want to tell a story enough times that it becomes our story of what's really true. Because we are on an evolutionary path, all human beings. We either are on an evolutionary path or we're stuck. The stuckness is where the pain comes in. The evolutionary path, you're going to experience challenge and difficulty. So to begin, let's go ahead and sit up nice and tall and allow the eyes gently to close. And drawing our attention inward, connecting in with the breath. And take a deep inhale through the nose. And a full exhale. A deep inhale. A full exhale. And then a deep, deep inhale. And a full exhale. Gently coming with the eyes open and settling into this sacred space together. Welcome to In the Circle. The concept of the circle, obviously an archetypal idea. We have it on our wrist here, this symbol, an unbroken chain, if you will. The circle that forms around a fire, and human beings connect to nature, connect to the earth, connect to the sacred. Nobody's ahead, nobody's behind. Everybody's equal. This unbroken chain of energy in any circle. And the circle that we all find ourselves in is in and of itself an inquiry. What circle do you find yourself in your life? Or what circles? So I just wanted to say that this sacred, archetypal, geometric shape, all that it stands for, and the significance of it is a part of the reason we're here today, that we can explore the questions that arise in our hearts, in our minds, as we are each of us walking a path of discovery through this life, this human condition. I'm grateful to sit in circle with you, each of you. I'm grateful that you made a decision to sit in circle and to be with each other today, that we can explore what each of us will bring. So thank you. And without further ado, I'd like to ask, which of you would like to present your inquiry first? I see Patty. Wonderful.
First, I do want to thank you so much. And it truly is a privilege to be able to participate in this podcast. I've enjoyed listening to it over the past several months. I became a member of Recovery 2.0 a little bit less than a year ago. And it has been so many different options that are available that are so helpful. It's been a great resource for me in aiding my recovery. And so I thank you. You and your team, incredible. So it's been a true blessing to be able to participate in this and in Recovery 2.0.
Thank you, Patty.
My inquiry is I have experienced, as many have, some significant trauma in my life. And, we hear so much about how trauma is stored in the body. I was interested in finding out your thoughts on how that occurs, what actually happens there. And really, for me, more importantly, even is how do we begin healing through that to aid in getting the trauma out of the body and begin the healing process.
Thank you so much, Patty. I love this inquiry. It involves the T word, which is just an incredible. If there was some way to measure the number of times any word shows up in the collective human experience, clearly this would be one of the big ones of the last couple years. So I'm going to look at this from a few different perspectives. The first perspective is to revisit once again, as we have for maybe 100 or 150 years. Let's revisit the concept of mind-body connection. So if I'm thinking it, so thinking means memory or reflection or contemplation, or at the subconscious level, if there is a subconscious presence there that's not in my consciousness, in my mind, in my awareness at that moment. If I'm thinking it, it's also in the body. It can't ever just be one or the other, because that's not the way our human mechanism works. So if I have a negative feeling, for example, let's call it a resentment, something took place, it left in me a residue of emotion, which maybe it was anger or sadness, or it was a jealousy, or something that we would label as a negative emotion, something that's painful to feel. If I'm aware of the anger, I'm aware of it mentally, I'm also experiencing it physically. It's here in the system. And so I just want to start with that we often think, I have experienced trauma, and in my day-to-day, until it's resolved, I'm reliving that trauma, and it's a psychological problem for me. Well, that may be true, but it's also a physical problem. How do we know this? When we are learning to better understand the communication of the body, something more somatic. It's not happening at the level of thought, but it's happening at the level of body. When we understand that communication, a skilled therapist might say, where are you feeling your anger? And you start to scan the body, and you might say something, oh, well, I feel it over here on the left side of my abdomen. I'm feeling this tension or this feeling there. And let's say that's an accurate representation of, wow, I'm feeling that anger in the stomach, right? I'm feeling that anger in my stomach. So there's that physical feeling of this is where I'm feeling it in the body. There's a mental aspect of it. I'm thinking about that. I have to sort of direct my mind to figure out, where is this thing? It's all happening at the same time. So when we talk about trauma, in a way, there's no such thing as a psychological trauma versus a physical trauma. It's all trauma. And let's be clear that when we talk about trauma, what we mean is an event that leaves a residue behind it. So to experience, for example, a car accident, and to have taken on a physical injury because you had a car accident, if that physical injury continues over time to be mentally difficult, or you keep envisioning the accident and you keep seeing it, and it's replaying itself in your mind, and of course your body is healing from it on some level. Well, that residue, that experience of an ongoing experience of negativity, I'm going to refer to that as trauma. There are people who experience traumatic events who do not take on the trauma of those events. That's interesting. So a person can, for example, experience something that was difficult in the moment or was a negative experience in the moment, but it didn't continue in its residue. It didn't have that element of continuation over time. The memory of it wasn't a traumatic memory. That is an example of somebody, feeling something that was difficult in the moment, but it wasn't traumatizing to them over time. They were able to work it out in the moment, or it just didn't leave its imprint in the same way that something that would be a traumatizing event over time. So also, when we talk about trauma, because we're looking at it energetically, what's left over after an event? What's left over? How does that cause a person to carry that energy? How does it influence their behavior? And most importantly, how can they work it out, which is the second part of your inquiry, which we'll come to momentarily. Traumas can be big traumas or relatively smaller traumas, or what we wouldn't necessarily think of as a trauma. And there are very big things that can take place, which end up not being traumatic. And there are very relatively smaller things that we wouldn't think of as particularly traumatic that can stay with a person and be traumatizing over time. So we're not speaking about any one kind of thing. So the biggest traumas that we think of, I think, in our society are, for example, physical injury, war-related injury. So we're all aware of the concept of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder for soldiers and people in the military who are in these extremely stressful, literally life-threatening situations, and they see terrible things that are hard for the mind and body to digest and process through, and they see those things repeatedly, so these traumas grow and are stacked one on the next, and we're very familiar with that kind of trauma. And in fact, one might ask, how could a human being not experience that kind of trauma if they're in a war-torn country or they experience that kind of pain and suffering? The worst that human beings have to display, to fight and to kill each other. Beyond that, we have the severe traumas of other kinds of physical trauma, like accident or injury, a car accident, a ski accident, these kinds of things. Then we have other forms of violence that are in our society, and also those kinds of traumas that someone experiences, whether that's a physical and sexual trauma. These are the sort of the big traumas. An affront upon someone's personal body or property or space. People can be traumatized by the idea that somebody broke into their home, even if they weren't in their home. That can be a traumatic event for somebody, and they can literally be so terrified that they can't go back to that home. So there's so many ways to look at these very, very big traumas. I think we also, in recent years, are looking at trauma in this different energetic way. What's left over from an event? We have to also look at some of the relatively smaller traumas of emotional neglect, abandonment, a sense that one doesn't belong anywhere. A sense of not belonging is so painful. Loneliness can be traumatizing. And then there's some self-inflicted traumas. So sometimes traumatized people get into things like drugs and alcohol or other behaviors to try to deal with their trauma. And their use of drugs and alcohol can actually be further traumatizing to them. So I can speak from personal experience. I have traumatized myself. No question, I traumatized myself through the use of crack cocaine. It was for me a psychotic experience. It's like when I think back on it, it's literally like there was another human being there. It wasn't me, a possessed human being. But no question that those late nights with my nervous system completely just rattled, those were traumatizing events for me. And in my recovery, I had to work out some of the self-inflicted trauma. So traumas aren't necessarily coming from the wrongdoing of others or from these horrible war-related situations, but sometimes we traumatize ourselves. And that's another interesting aspect that we don't hear about too much. In all cases, we want to become more aware. Awareness, without question, being the first step towards the resolution of a trauma, of something that's unfinished, of an energy that remains, that is currently affecting our behavior today. Though it is not relevant to the present moment right here and now, we can remain in trigger, being triggered by certain actions and behaviors of other people. We can hear a loud noise and become very, very frightened out of, in a more amplified way than is necessary given what's going on in front of us. But we know that's related to something that's been unresolved in the past. There's a healing there that could still take place, an integration, if you will. Nikki Myers, who's a dear friend and colleague, often says, if your reaction to something here and now is hysterical, usually that's because it's historical, meaning there's a history to it. There's something unfinished there that's causing you to be in a state of heightened alert or vigilance. I can give you a personal experience of, as a yoga teacher, every now and then when I'm walking around a room giving people adjustments, every now and then there's somebody that I come to adjust, and I'm always trying to make sure the person is aware that I'm there and I'm about to put my hands on them in a very respectful, very conscious way to try to help them access a certain posture. Every now and then I scare somebody and they jump. And it's not that I've startled them in the moment they were thinking about something else and I startled them. No, this is a different quality. This is like a person who is sincerely frightened, and particularly frightened about being touched, and particularly frightened about being touched when they weren't aware they were about to be, even if I tried to make them aware. So that's an interesting thing. And so what we're looking at is the ways that trauma can play itself out in present moment situations, whatever they might be, big or small. So awareness is going to be the first aspect. We have to catch ourselves in our behaviors. We have to be willing to see our trigger. That's challenging for us because sometimes we build walls around our trigger. For example, anger, like severe anger, which might be triggered because of past trauma and something that's taking place in the present moment. Sometimes we'll build a wall around that anger and we'll call it self-righteous anger. So now we've decided that this anger, this rage that we feel, this intensity of emotion is justified. And we want to tell people a story. This is justified. Did you see what she did? Did you see what he did? Did you see the situation? Did you see what took place? I'm absolutely justified in being enraged. Well, we don't want to take a feeling from someone. We also don't want someone to remain in a painful feeling for a lifetime. So this is an interesting debate that we get into, or a discussion, about allowing someone their feeling, allowing someone their story of trauma, while at the same time nudging them forward into greater and greater levels of truth and truthfulness, and processing through the old story, breaking down the walls that are protecting that old story, so that somebody can begin to finally heal. How does it happen? It happens through speaking. So there's talk therapy, connecting with literally friends, family, people in recovery, therapists, teachers, coaches, mentors, and guides. Talking is very important. But as we began exploring this inquiry, we also spoke about mind-body connection. And so we know we're going to have to move the body also. We're actually going to have to move the body. And we're going to have to engage in what I call Kriya. Kriya. K-R-I-Y-A. Kriya. Practices. Yoga practices, particular sets of yoga are referred to as Kriyas. The word actually means complete action. But for our purposes today, I want to say that to engage in Kriya is to engage in an action that furthers your evolution. Now, what are these practices? These are breath practices. These are yogic practices, meditation practices, and they're very powerful. They force us to focus. They force us to move in certain ways. And I would say that my direct experience individually and as a teacher, these Kriyas get down deep enough into a person's body and mind to be able to release a lot of the stuck energy. How does that happen? It happens because the body wants it out. The body actually wants it out. It needs some help. It needs a powerful technology. And so we apply the technology of yoga and meditation to help it to release what is there. What happens if we don't do that? Well, very often it's a sense of stuckness. One feels stuck, gripped. One is stuck where? In the past, in a memory, in a perception of what took place, in a story that's been built up to allow someone to stay in the perception of what took place. To begin to do this yogic work, this somatic work, this therapeutic work, this cognitive work, all of it together is an incredibly powerful way to really begin to set yourself free. So this work of Kriya and this work of talking it out, also that combination is wonderful. Helps to have a kind community around you. Helps to have a kind-hearted teacher, somebody that can help to guide you, that you can ask, here's what I'm experiencing. What are your thoughts here? I think with regards to resolving trauma, because at some point in our society, we decided that psychology was the place where we would fight our fight, that psychology was the place where the thing had to be worked out. We miss the physical piece, and definitely we miss the spiritual piece. And because of that, I think that many people stop at talk therapy. So you're there sometimes for years, talking it out. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for talk therapy. I just believe it's an incredible spoke in a wheel of a comprehensive plan that doesn't include just the mind. So if we stop at psychology and we're talking it out, sometimes we stay stuck there for a long time. Somebody remains stuck in the story. What I mean by that is, if you heard a person today tell a story about the thing that had taken place in their life, and it sounded to you listening to the story like, okay, here's a person who feels like something happened to them. They're really in the energy of having been a victim or having been victimized. And maybe it's true that somebody did something terrible to them. Maybe that's true. But what we know is, because of compassion and love for this person, we don't want them to remain a victim to this thing for the rest of their life. We need to honor the fact that, yes, there was a terrible thing that took place. 10 years from now, if you hear from the same person and they're still gripped in the story the same way, you would have to say to yourself, wow, I really feel tremendous compassion and sadness for this person, because 10 years later, they're still stuck in the same story, in the same energy. And you know where that energy is? It's in their body. And they haven't been able to process it through and get through it. Critically important thing we're talking about. So, as my friend Deborah Silverman has said, it's important that the story be told, but not that it be cemented into reality and worn like a badge of courage. We don't want to tell a story enough times that it becomes our story of what's really true. Because we are on an evolutionary path, all human beings. We either are on an evolutionary path or we're stuck. The stuckness is where the pain comes in. The evolutionary path, you're going to experience challenge and difficulty. No question, but you'll overcome challenge and difficulty, and you'll come to periods of tremendous freedom and breakthroughs and aha moments, and you'll get a deeper and a deeper sense of love and being part of the wonder and awe of existence. But the suffering really takes place when we're stuck and stagnant and we don't know how to move forward and how to get through some of the stuff that's holding us back. And please, I want everyone to hear this especially. Don't get me wrong. There are people who perpetrate the most heinous things against other people. There are terrible, terrible, painful, awful situations that befall helpless people like children. And I don't mean to diminish that in any way. It's especially because those things happen that we don't want those children to spend a lifetime being traumatized by something that happened at the beginning of their life. We want to do everything in our power to help them move through that stuff, help them get free of it. Because you know where that traumatized 6-year-old kid is going to end up? They're going to end up in jail, in the narcotics division. And this is not something I'm making up. These traumatized people will traumatize other people if they cannot work out their trauma, or they will traumatize themselves and they will end up in jails, institutions, and they will be in a certain kind of trouble that nobody wants to be in. And it wasn't their fault, but either they or we or the collective, we were unable to help them work it out before the pain and the suffering of that trauma continued itself into their life and the next generation. So when we talk about trauma, yes, it's an individual situation, but it's also societal and it's also intergenerational. We're talking about a situation that affects generations. On that note, we inherit a lot of things from our parents. Guess what one of those inheritances is? Their trauma. Okay? If they are not able to work it out, they're trying to work it out in their relationship with you and their relationship with everybody else. And down it comes another generation. How do we know that trauma and emotions and the energy of emotion and stuck emotion lives in the body? Because you can see it. You don't see it as like, you're not looking into someone's body and saying, oh, look, there's a batch of anger near Tommy's liver. Wow, he better work that out. No, you can see it written on someone's body in the way that they walk, the way that they sit, the way that they carry their shoulders and their spine and the way that they breathe. It's all written right here. The human body is a recording device. So when you see someone who's really, really beat up, remember, you're seeing a physical manifestation of, sure, there's physical things that took place for that person, but it's also very much an unresolved depository of emotion. So, awareness. We catch ourselves in our triggers. When we're in painful relationships, we move beyond blame and we move beyond complaint, not to let the other person off the hook, but to let ourselves off the hook. If you are blaming and you are complaining, then you're not aware of the trigger. You're too busy pushing that off on somebody else and saying something internally like, it's got nothing to do with me. This is not my fault. Well, your experience is 100% your responsibility. 100% your responsibility. So while blame and complaint, it's not recommended because it's not ultimately helpful. It's not ultimately truthful because you're not able to take a look in the moment at what's really going on for you. So once we're aware and we're willing, and we can suspend that default to blame and complaint, we can start to ask ourselves some better questions. And I've said this in other podcasts, but I think recovery is about asking better and better questions. So we get to better and better answers, and a question I might have asked in addiction was, I wonder how I'll get high today. That might have been the most sophisticated question I was able to ask myself. Now in recovery, I'm asking like, wow, I wonder how I can plug into life today. I wonder how I could be useful to someone today. Oh, I wonder how I could solve this problem that I'm facing, or I'm having trouble in this relationship. What would be the best way forward? Those questions are questions that lead to action, lead to contemplation, and lead me down a road of discovery where I'm willing to discover something new and to say, wow, I have a part in my resentments. I have a part in my traumas. I have a part in my all my relationships. I'm having a heck of a time in one of my relationships right now within my family. It's a real humdinger. I'll say that. And I know enough to know that it's no one can be blamed. I can't complain about this. I have only got to see what is here so that I don't take on an anger or a resentment. I can be in compassion for myself and this other person, even if I don't like their behavior, even if I don't like my behavior. And I can begin to sort of work with that with the guidance and the skill of wise counsel. And, we have this incredible thing at our disposal called the 12 steps. And through that process, we have actually trained ourselves to look at resentments a certain way and to take responsibility and to try to look at our side of the street. We all know we may not be perfect in this process, but the training that we've gone through to look at the world in that way has been so effective and helpful for many of us to not stay in a traumatic situation or to not stay in a situation of great resentment. So again, to recap, I think it's awareness. I think it's counsel. I think it's the willingness to look at your stories and the ways that you might be defending against evolution, to move forward and to discover for yourself. I think at the end of the day, love is the great medicine, that when two people sit opposite each other and really share honestly, and we're sharing honestly right now, that there's a love there and there's a kind of an alchemy that can take place that can really heal. And I came into recovery a very angry person, and I didn't really have a sense of how I was going to be able to resolve that in this life. And when I came into recovery, I was pretty much resolved to the idea that I was just going to be angry and I was always going to have this problem. And that's because I didn't know a way through, and until I learned and was trained to resolve anger, to resolve trauma, to resolve resentment, all of the unfinished business of wreckage that I had caused. And that also, it's okay to say that other people have caused wreckage too. And that's all right without blaming and complaining. I'm not going to get too far down the road of looking at their side of the street, but it's important for me to understand I'm in a constellation of people, varying levels of consciousness, varying levels of awareness. And it's okay, I feel, to be able to say, the important thing is for me to look at my side of the street, and sometimes people do pretty shitty things. And that's all right. That's all right to acknowledge that. I just don't want to get caught up in that as an excuse as to why I can still be miserable. I want to empower myself and anybody else. If you feel like you're carrying the weight of the past, please be willing to look at it in such a way that you know you're moving through it, and you're not going to hang on to it as an excuse to remain stuck. Because if you do the work, you will be able to set yourself free. And whatever those traumatizing events were, they won't have control over you any longer. And that's called freedom. And that's what we wish, I think, for ourselves and for each other. So these are some of the reflections that come up for me, Patty, in this inquiry. Tell me what comes up for you as you're listening to this.
Well, I found that to be incredibly helpful. One of the things that popped out that really stuck that you said is the body wants it out. So that was very powerful to me. So knowing that it does not want to be it doesn't want to be stuck within, then that gives, and then also that's very empowering to know that I do have ways of moving this out, and following the ideas and the suggestions that you did make were really helpful for me. And I will absolutely be looking into doing a Kriya, and more than one, and very, very, as I said, empowering, because I have not really felt in a victim frame of mind, but I absolutely know that more needs to be done as far as moving this out, and as you said, gaining freedom.
Beautiful.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. I just want to say that about the body wanting it out, there's this conflict that can take place if we don't understand this, because the mind may be holding on to it, but the body wants it gone. And right there, you've got this internal conflict taking place. And when the mind and the body are united, there's very few things we can't do. Very few things we can't do. So it's good to get rid of conflict. Lastly, obviously I advocate for yoga, and I advocate for breath work, and I advocate for Kriya. I advocate for meditation, healthy diet, and all this. I am not one of those guys that feels this is the only way to resolve trauma. It's one way. People have resolved trauma walking in nature, immersing themselves in that vibration for a while. People have resolved trauma hugging another human being. People have resolved trauma by expressing themselves honestly. I'm simply saying that there is this element of trauma that is in the body, and it also has to be worked out. And I personally know of nothing so effective at the level of mind, body, and spirit as yoga. And so if that is even a thought in someone's mind, please give it a try. And there's lots of different kinds of yoga. Give it all a try. See what resonates for you. Move the energy. Get yourself present. Let go of the past and be free.